Let us begin. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming and joining us here. This is United Church on the Green, New Haven. I'd just like to welcome you all. There's a tradition in the Congregational Church, particularly here in New England, that on Sunday mornings and at special services, we start the service off by processing the Bible into the building and placing it on the pulpit. And when that happens, this building becomes a sacred space, a church. And then at the end of service, we recess the Bible, turning this back into a meeting house. And the symbolism of the Bible being carried out is all that good news we got in here, we're supposed to take out to the world. This is an opportunity for us to get some good news, to get some troubling news, and to come up with some solutions around how we can make changes into the way we live in this planet and who suffers from the abuses that many of us make. And I'm including myself in that. I'm still learning how to be a bit more environmentally friendly. Still got to get rid of my SUV. Still got to get rid of some of the other stuff I'm doing. But this is an opportunity for us to come together and discuss and to hear from folks who are dealing with the problems on the ground that we are all faced with. Now, I am not an environmental expert. I don't know why they asked me to moderate this, so you won't hear a lot of wisdom around the environment coming out of me. That's why we have the experts here. So we're going to have our panel beginning first. We're going to have our keynote speaker come up and talk for about 30 minutes or so. And then we have a panel of 4 who will come up. Each will give a 5-minute talk about who they are and what they're working on. And then they will be at the table and you will be able to ask questions. Does that sound okay? Yeah. Well, then let's get right to it. I am going to start by reading what I was given about Maya. Maya K. Van Rossum is the founder of Green Amendments for the Generations, a grassroots nonprofit organization inspiring a nationwide movement to secure constitutional recognition and protection of environmental rights in every state and ultimately at the federal level. She is the author of the Green Amendment, The People's Fight for a Clean, Safe, and Healthy Environment. And I believe there are copies out there. You can pick one up and maybe even get it signed. Green amendments have been proposed in 15 states, including Connecticut, with New York formally passing a Green Amendment in 2021. Maya is also the Delaware Riverkeeper, leading the watershed-based advocacy organization, the Delaware Riverkeeper Network. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Maya K. Van Rossum.
Thank you for that kind introduction and that warm welcome. I really appreciate it. So it really is an honor to be here with so many people who care so deeply about the environment and to be here with the leaders of our Connecticut Environmental Rights Amendment Alliance, a collaboration of individuals and organizations of which I am proud to be a part that have come together to really advance this cause here in the state of Connecticut. I thank you for the kind introduction and the kind words. To me, the most important thing I want you to know about me is that I've been an environmental activist and attorney for 30 years now. And it is as a result of that environmental activism and that legal work that I, like so many of you, have come to experience the myriad of ways that our current system of environmental protection laws here in the United States of America, no matter where you are, no matter what state, just fundamentally fails us. And that we truly do need a transformational pathway, a new transformational pathway here in the U.S. when it comes to environmental protection. And that's really what the Green Amendment movement is all about. It's about what I believe to be that transformational pathway that will get us to a new level, a different level of environmental protection that's so important and so essential. What I'd like to do is just, before I sort of do my remarks, which I hope don't go 30 minutes, I really want to just pick one of the stories from my book that I think really helps ground us in why protecting the environment is so important. This is not just some thought exercise, right? When we talk about the importance of protecting our environment, we really are talking about real people and real lives that are suffering real harm because of the pollution and the degradation that's happening in states across our nation, no matter where you are. And so I think that this story, at least for me, I think hits it home about as powerfully as you can bring it home. And so I just want to share it, or at least a portion of it. And I call this Gina's story. In the first house lived Gina's sister, Donna, who had tumors all over her body, and Donna's daughter, who was pregnant and repeatedly suffering inexplicable seizures. The next house belonged to Patsy, Gina's cousin, who'd had a basic water softener system in place for a decade. The system itself, along with the shipments of salt that kept it running, was provided by Mount Air Farms, which had agreed to install them in a handful of nearby houses after an EPA investigation found unacceptably high levels of nitrates, which cause cancer and birth defects, among other harms, when found in wells and groundwater. Next was Gina's house, where she lived with her mother. Gina was sick constantly, experiencing frequent gastrointestinal issues and hair loss that left her with permanent bald spots. Gina's daughter had been born with an extra ear, but no one had endured greater suffering or paid a higher price for Mount Air's callously destructive actions and pollution than Gina's son, Kiwanis. Like Gina, Kiwanis had been born with asthma. His case was particularly severe. When your asthma is at its worst, it's like somebody put a plastic bag over your head and just pulled on a string and cut off all your air circulation, says Gina. He really suffered. He just suffered, she added. When Kiwanis left Millsboro for a year to attend school, his condition seemed to improve significantly. But then he came home, and his asthma was once again a daily source of hardship. Despite nebulizers, inhalers, prescription steroids, and an EpiPen, he struggled to keep it under control. On March 5th, 2014, Gina got a frantic phone call. While hanging out in a house full of friends, Kiwanis had suffered an extremely severe asthma attack. They were calling an ambulance. She needed to drive immediately to the hospital. By the time Gina arrived, Kiwanis had passed away. He was just 24 years old. The thing is, that story didn't take place here in the state of Connecticut, but it could have, right? Stories like this are happening in communities across our nation. We have people across our nation who are drinking contaminated water, and as a result, there are children being born with low infant birth weights. We have kids getting non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. We have people and families suffering from cancers of all kinds: kidney cancer, testicular cancer, prostate cancer, ovarian cancer, and much, much more. We have people who are breathing polluted air that's causing heart attacks and asthma attacks. Polluted air that has neurotoxicants in it that are so damaging, they're going into school grounds and damaging the brains of children so that they can't even properly learn the information that's being put before them by their teachers. Air pollution that's causing ADHD and Alzheimer's, right? The young are suffering, the older are suffering. Communities are being forced to live next to toxic sites and suffering the myriad of harms that toxic exposure causes. Species of all kind, non-human species, they're suffering too, right? The plants and the animals are being harmed in so many ways. And of course, as a community, as a state, as a nation, as a world, we're facing a climate crisis. People are suffering harm to their health and their safety from environmental pollution and degradation, right? They're suffering the health consequences, but they're also suffering from increasing flooding and flood damages, wildfires, droughts, right? Both ends of the spectrum, people are getting harmed. The sanctity of people's homes and hearts are being invaded by the fear and the harms and the horrors that pollution and environmental degradation cause. Right? There's a loss of economic security in communities across our nation because of environmental pollution and degradation, right? Economic prosperity and environmental prosperity, they go hand in hand, right? You can't have a healthy economy without a healthy environment. Very literally, every aspect of people's lives are being impacted by the way we treat the environment, impacted negatively or impacted positively. On the negative side, communities of color, indigenous communities, immigrant communities, low-income communities, they are suffering much worse than the rest of us. They suffer from disproportionate exposure to highly polluting industrial operations and environmentally degrading activities, impacting their lives day in and day out so severely and so sorely. And so much of this is happening because industry and business and politicians treat our environment and the resulting harms to people and to nature as though they're bargaining chips, right? Something to be negotiated away for profits or political access or power or personal luxury. And as a result, we have in place here in Connecticut, here in states across the United States of America at the federal level, we have a system of laws and governance which deems pollution and degradation acceptable. As long as the profit and the political gain is big enough, it's A-okay, right? We have a system of laws that really, when it comes to the environment, is focused on legalizing environmental pollution, degradation, and harm. It is not illegal to spew pollution into the air, to dump it into the water, to fill in a wetlands, to decimate a species that's on the brink of extinction, rob them of their healthy habitats that they need to survive. None of that is illegal as long as you go to the right agencies and you get the right reviews and you get the right permits. Then it's all very legal, right? So there have been benefits from the environmental laws that we have in place, but the benefits that have come with a ceiling. And in addition, they don't address many of the cumulative impacts and numerous aspects of the harm that's come along with pollution and degradation. So much evades the laws and the regulations that we have in place. So, that cap just isn't good enough, and we have people that are suffering. In this system of laws and governance, we have to say it again, environmental racism, systemic environmental racism is literally built in. With communities of color, low-income communities, indigenous communities, immigrant communities being intentionally targeted for those highly polluting industrial operations. They are not suffering disproportionate impacts in spite of the laws we have in place. They're suffering disproportionate impacts because of those laws, because of how they're intentionally written, interpreted, and applied, and either enforced or not enforced, right? So this is a system where ultimate power lies with the government. The government decides what laws they're going to write to regulate the environment. They decide how they're going to interpret those laws. They decide how they're going to apply those laws. They decide whether or not they're going to enforce those laws. And when the winds of politics change, they decide whether or not they're going to strip away even the minimal protections those laws give us. Right? So that power really lies with the government when it comes to environmental protection. It doesn't lie with we the people. Because so much of what is happening in terms of pollution and degradation is very legal under this system of laws and governance, right? There's not much, too often there's not much that we the people can do. We try, we protest, we try to elect better people to office, but we just don't have the necessary power to really take control in so many situations in this dynamic. But that is not how it works in other aspects of fundamental rights. When it comes to the right to free speech and freedom of religion, when it comes to private property rights, right? When it comes to the right to bear arms, ultimate power lies with the people, because those fundamental rights are recognized and protected in the Bill of Rights section of our state and federal constitutions, and explicitly make clear that ultimate power lies with the people, that government officials are only acting in service to that constitutional entitlement of the people. And that when our government officials get it wrong and infringe on those fundamental rights, we, the people, can do something about it. We can get access to the courts and do something about it, something meaningful, something powerful, and something important. And that's what the Connecticut Green Amendment is all about. It is about, in the environmental context, we, the people, taking our power back from government officials so that we do have the ultimate authority. We do have the ultimate entitlement. We are turning the tables so that the power lies with the people when it comes to environmental protection, as opposed to purely with our government officials. With the passage of the Connecticut Green Amendment, the Constitutional Environmental Rights Amendment that's being advanced here in the state of Connecticut, the people will have, in the Bill of Rights section of the state constitution, a constitutional right to clean and healthy water, air, soils, and environments, the right to a stable climate, the right to self-sustaining ecosystems. There will be an obligation on all government officials at every level of government to protect these environmental rights for all people equitably, regardless of their race, their ethnicity, their tribal membership status, their socioeconomics, where they live, what their gender is, even what their generation is. All government officials will be constitutionally bound to protect the environmental rights of all people equitably. And they will also have to protect the natural resources of the state, across the state of Connecticut. And they will have to make sure that those natural resources are protected equitably for all people as well, including future generations. And this idea of generational protection of natural resources and environmental rights, this is also not just a pretty idea. We've demonstrated in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, where we have this kind of constitutional language already, we've proven in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that that obligation to protect the rights of future generations is actually enforceable, that future generations have the same right as those of us who are here today. They don't just get our leftovers when it comes to natural resources protections and environmental rights. Their rights are on par with our rights. So when our government officials take action, they have to make sure that they are protecting those rights and resources of future generations, also equitably on par with those of us who are here today. It's powerful, it's meaningful, it's enforceable. Every single word in the Connecticut Green Amendment, the Connecticut Environmental Rights Amendment, means something and brings additional power to the protection of the natural resources of this state and the environmental rights of the people of Connecticut. Now, the Connecticut Green Amendment, the Connecticut Environmental Rights Amendment that's being proposed, is very different from what you see in most states across the nation. I call it a green amendment, not just an environmental rights amendment, because it actually meets these key criteria that I have identified along with colleagues, these key criteria that are essential for lifting up environmental rights so they are given highest constitutional recognition, protection, and enforceability here in the state of Connecticut. There are a lot of states across the nation that have environmental rights amendments. In fact, almost every state, save for about half a dozen, one of which is Connecticut, talks about the environment somewhere within their constitutions. Actually, dozens of them talk about environmental rights. They talk about the right of people to a clean, safe, and healthy environment, right? They talk about it as great policy for the state. But in that word, policy of the state, that's the downfall of that amendment. Because policy, right, if you have an environmental right to clean water, clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments, and that's the policy of our state, all that's saying is that's our advice to you government officials that we think you should follow. But you don't have to, because like all advice, you can take it or you can leave it. And more often than not, when it comes to the environment, our government officials will leave it. So there are a lot of environmental rights amendments that talk about rights, but it's good policy. So it's robbed of all its legal strength. Or we have a lot of states that talk about people having environmental rights in that state, and they say, and the way you get those rights is your state legislature will define them and defend them. So your right isn't actually to the clean, safe, and healthy environment described in that amendment. Your right is to have your legislators legislate. And if your legislators legislate badly in a way that sacrifices you, that sacrifices the natural resources of the state, that sacrifices future generations to a climate crisis, guess what? The Constitution said that was just fine because there too, the legislators have the power. It's not really a right of the people, right? So what we're doing here in Connecticut, what's being proposed here in Connecticut is a right of the people to a clean, safe, and healthy environment, and a right of the people to ensure that their government officials protect the natural resources of the state for present and future generations, and the right of the people to ensure that those environmental rights and natural resources are protected equitably, regardless of race, ethnicity, tribal membership status, socioeconomics, gender, geography, or generation. Now, there are already 3 states that have this kind of right: Pennsylvania, Montana, and New York. Each one of those states has its own story for how they have these rights. Pennsylvania and Montana have had them for a little while now, and we've shown some real great, powerful legal precedent, right, coming out of those constitutional environmental rights amendments. And we were successful with our Green Amendments for the Generations movement as well, getting a constitutional green amendment passed in the state of New York by a vote of 70% of the people on November 2nd, 2021. So their green amendment went into effect January 1 of 2022, and we're already seeing positive, powerful impact. If Connecticut poses this proposed environmental rights amendment that meets the Green Amendment criteria, Connecticut could be state number 4 to have a constitutional green amendment. But whether or not you secure that number 4 spot, right, you're still an inspiration, because there really are only 15 other states. Now, that's a lot of states, but there are only 15 other states that are right now on this green amendment path as well. And so all of those states are looking at what each other states are doing. And let me tell you, people are looking at what's happening here in the state of Connecticut and are like, wow, that's really powerful. You have nearly 36 organizations already signed on in support. You've had a hearing with really powerful testimony and powerful questions. I mean, all the states where Green Amendment proposals have been put forth are watching one another and are being inspired by one another's successes, including successes here in the state of Connecticut. And in states where they don't have a Green Amendment proposal yet, they're looking around, seeing what's happening, and they're looking at what's happening here in the state of Connecticut and seeing that it's powerful and it's important, right? So you are an inspiration to one another if you're part of this Green Amendment movement, but you are also an inspiration for communities across the nation who know that they too, like we here in Connecticut, need this most powerful protection for our environment. Now, I sort of began by saying that we needed transformational change when it came to environmental protection, and that I believe, as a 30-year activist and attorney working in the environment, that Green Amendments bring this transformational change. So I just want to explain a little bit how and why. Green Amendments are very empowering legally, and they're very empowering in terms of environmental activism. So legally, Green Amendments lift environmental rights. You've heard me say it already. I'm going to say it again. Lift up environmental rights so they get highest constitutional standing. It places environmental rights on par with those other human, civil, and political rights that we all hold dear, like the right to free speech, like the right to freedom of religion, like private property rights, like the right to bear arms. We all know, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, we all know how powerfully those rights are protected. How when somebody claims that there's been an infringement on those constitutional rights, how the community rallies around to come and stand by that person who feels that their right has been infringed upon. How the press, the media instantly starts to pay attention and write powerful stories about it. How legislators come forth and demand that the constitutional right be restored. And how judges and justices listen carefully to the cases that are put before them. And for the most part, not always, but for the most part, do their best to ensure that the constitutional entitlement, the constitutional right in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution is preserved, is protected from government infringement. Well, that same powerful protection now comes to bear for the environment when you have a Green Amendment. It means, again, all government officials at every level of government, from the local town council to the state legislature to the governor's office and all the regulatory agencies in between, become constitutionally bound to protect the environmental rights of all the people at every stage of decision making. From day one when they're decision making, when it is the easiest opportunity to make change and ensure critical environmental protections. And they have to protect these environmental rights and these natural resources, again, can't say it enough, equitably for all people. When you have a Green Amendment in place, all the laws that are already on the books, they still remain. They're still important if they've been doing part of the good job of protecting the environment. But now all of those existing laws have to be read through the lens of the constitutional entitlement. Now, clean water can't be defined as polluted water. Clean water actually has to be defined, if it's written in a piece of legislation, as clean water, right? It has to be interpreted and approached that way, because every single existing law is being interpreted and applied, again, through that lens of the obligation of the government to protect the rights of the people to a clean, safe, and healthy environment. Where there are gaps in the laws, where the laws are missing, where there's a loophole that has been written in, the people can turn to the Constitution to try to get a remedy. How many people have heard about PFAS? Right? PFAS is a man-made family of chemicals found in stain-resistant clothing and carpeting. It's in Teflon, it's in firefighting foam. People are hearing about it all over the place. And why are they hearing about it all over the place? Because it's really toxic stuff that is in the drinking water supplies of hundreds of millions of people across the nation. It's in fish flesh, it's in deer flesh, it's in farms and farming and wreaking havoc there. Why is PFAS wreaking so much havoc? Because of an absence of law. Because since its inception, and only now is it starting to change, there have been no laws and no regulations to regulate the use of PFAS in devastating ways that have allowed this dangerous chemical to slither out into the environment, slither into people's drinking water supplies, slither into our bodies, and cause harm. If we had a constitutional green amendment in every single state when PFAS was coming out, was this emerging contaminant out of industry, and we started to see the science about how damaging and dangerous it was, we, the people, could have turned to our constitutional right to clean water and a healthy environment to get our government officials to take action sooner, more meaningfully, so they could prevent harm. And in fact, that's part of what a Green Amendment does. It reorients all government action. So it's focused on prevention of pollution, degradation, and harm, not just managing it through reviews and permits. Right? So the Green... It is not just coming to light now. There's been, but we're not going to debate it. Oh, thank you. But I'm going to disagree with you because, and you can read about it in the book, we have actually known about it and by the way, not a penny from the book goes into my pocket. Every penny for the book goes to the Green Amendment movement. It's not about making money, it's about saving the world. The book is just a way to get the message out. Anyway, but I appreciate you for saying that, but I do want to say one of the things that I'm very clear about in the book is that we have known about this, about the damages of PFAS for a long time. At least our government officials have, and they haven't done anything. But if we had had a Green Amendment, we could have used that to get more meaningful action sooner. And in fact, we did that in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But that's another story. When we have a constitutional Green Amendment, our goal is to get our government officials to make better decisions sooner, right? To make better decisions when it comes to environmental protection. So they're genuinely protecting us and our environment and really doing that critical, important job. But when our government officials fail us, and take actions and activities that infringe upon our constitutional rights to a clean, safe, and healthy environment, with a constitutional Green Amendment, we can get immediate access to the courts to try to hold them accountable and to get that necessary remedy. But the Green Amendment isn't just about transforming the law, which it does beautifully and powerfully and meaningfully. It's not an instant panacea, but it is taking the most powerful legal tool we have in this nation, our state and federal constitutions, and putting it to work for the environment. But it's also very empowering for activists and activism. Because, right now, if you're an environmental advocate, I don't even want to say activists, right? There are a lot of people, they're just living their life, but something bad's about to happen in their community, and they want to get up at a public meeting or go to a hearing, and they want to advocate for the trees and the rivers and the environments and the wetlands and the people they love that are going to be impacted by whatever it is that's being proposed. So often people will go up, whether you're a seasoned activist or not, you go up there and it can be a little bit unnerving. Right? And you start to say your words, speaking on behalf of the environment, and inevitably somebody in the room will say, or even somebody on the decision-making dais with their body language will suggest, you're just a tree hugger. You're just a fish lover. You're a people hater. You're a job killer. Or like the chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, when referring to me and some of my colleagues, you're an eco-jihadist. And they're suggesting that you should sit down and shut up. And they're trying to intimidate you to sit down and shut up. But the thing is, when you have a Green Amendment, and I just want to say, by the way, tree hugger, fish lover, I'm all in. Please call me that. I am a tree hugger and a fish lover, and I'm a people lover, and I'm a job creator, and I'm all those things, right? So that's good. But when you are getting up to advocate for the environment and you have a Green Amendment in your state constitution or ultimately in our federal constitution, you are now not just a tree hugger and a fish lover. You are a United States patriot that is rising up to demand and defend your constitutional right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment. It transforms the whole conversation. You are now a constitutionalist, right? And so it's really hard for the people in the room to be so dismissive of you. You know, when it comes to the U.S., even if people disagree with you, if you are talking about a constitutional right, they view you differently, right? And all the decision makers on the decision-making dais that used to like fold their arms and they'd lean back and they'd roll their eyes, you know, when advocates would come up to speak in defense of the environment, not all of them, right? Where's Representative Michel? He's not one of them. He's one of our best activists. He stands up with you, right? And we appreciate you for that. But there are some who are up there and roll their eyes, right, and pretend to be bored and try to get you to sit down and shut up with their signs of boredom. They can't do that anymore, right? Because now what you're talking about is their constitutional obligation to protect your fundamental right, your fundamental entitlement, your fundamental freedom to a clean, safe, and healthy environment. So the whole dynamic when it comes to environmental activism, environmental advocacy, that whole conversation now is transformed if you have a Green Amendment in your state. And so with that, I just want to finish with one little reading from the book that I think really sums it up. And some of you may have heard this joke before, but I really think it every time I say that. I want to do one final reading, and I think it really sums it up for me. And I always say, of course it sums it up for me. I wrote it. So here it is. And I hope it sums it up for you too. No matter where you happen to live, I'm here to say that you should dramatically raise your expectations when it comes to the environment. You have a right to pure water, clean air, a stable climate, and a healthy environment. This right is inherent and indefeasible. It belongs to you. Many politicians rail against entitlements and dismiss millennials as an entitled generation, but they've got it wrong. Entitlement is not a dirty word. It's a recognition of rights. And make no mistake about it, when it comes to the environment, you are entitled. So thank you for joining me this evening. And I look forward to hearing the powerful, passionate words of my fellow panelists.
Let's give her another. That was wonderful. That was powerful. I learned so much just in. Thank you. Thank you. Although I am feeling some kind of way about being a constitutionalist. But I'll take it. I'll take it. I'll wear it proudly if it's for that cause. Some of the other stuff, though, we got to talk about. So, up next we have 4 very powerful activists, actionists, people who are out doing something and making things happen. And we'd like to have each of them come up and say a few words, about 5 minutes each, I think you were given, and then we will have them sit here at the table, and you can grill them with your questions. All right? So when we're doing the questions, please wait for someone to bring a mic to you so the folks watching at home, this is being streamed on YouTube. It'll be up on the United New Haven YouTube page, United Church New Haven YouTube page. It'll be up there for you to see it later. So, our panelists, and you will come up in the order as I'm going to read all four, and then you'll come up in the order I read. Alex Rodriguez is the Environmental Justice Specialist for Save the Sound. He is responsible for engaging stakeholders and collaborating with colleagues to advance environmental justice policies. He is currently advocating for SB 1147, a bill that will allow the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection and the Siting Council to deny certain permits for new affecting facilities and to apply conditions to the expansion of existing facilities. After Alex will be Aziz Dakin. Aziz is the Executive Director and lead organizer for the Connecticut Roundtable on Climate and Jobs, which builds alliances among diverse constituencies to combat climate change, create jobs, and promote racial, economic, and environmental justice. The Roundtable's most recent legislative action is the Carbon-Free Healthy School Initiative that seeks to rehab, renovate, and rebuild schools throughout Connecticut. After him will be Ian McDonald. Ian is a member of No More Dirty Power in Killingly, a community-led organization that fought hard to make sure Killingly wasn't saddled with a second large power plant. He is also a member of the Wyndham-Willimantic NAACP Environmental Justice Committee, the Connecticut Climate Crisis Mobilization Steering Committee, the Connecticut Zero Waste Coalition, and the New England Fix the Grid Study Group. And the first time I read this, I thought, and on Tuesdays he must sleep because there's not time to do all that stuff. And our final panelist will be Gabriela Campos. Gabriela is an activist, organizer, and mother, and co-creator of flytweetfacts.org. That's flytweetfacts.org, a website to spread factual information about the potential environmental and health effects of the planned expansion of Tweed Airport on the residents of East Haven and New Haven, including me, because those planes now fly over my house, and they didn't when I moved in. So you'll each come up and give 5 minutes, and then follow each other, and then we'll get right into the questions.
Okay, give it up for Reverend Ken, and give it up for Maya, everybody. So, I'm Alex Rodriguez. I'm from West Hartford. I've been working with Save the Sound a couple years now as an environmental justice specialist, and my role is to community organize and coalition organize. I've been community organizing for 7 years, and what I typically do is I guide people towards tackling public policy. I originally got involved in environmentalism because of a water bottle company that was lured by my water utility to a nearby town, Bloomfield. The Metropolitan District Commission lured a water bottle company, Niagara Bottling, to the town to offer them a plot of watershed land so that they could begin pumping water out of the ground at our expense, at the ratepayers' expense, and at our expense to life. And that's horrendous, is it not? Unfortunately, that deal was sealed. I organized a group of friends together to tackle this problem after learning from other groups in the nearby area, Save Our Water Connecticut, and some other groups about the issue. We crashed a town meeting, and we began writing legislators and took our advocacy to the streets, protested in front of the water utility, at least on a biweekly basis. And unfortunately, it was a done deal. I bring you this context because this is one step of me being into the movement. Second step was Hurricane Maria impacting Puerto Rico. My family largely comes from Puerto Rico. My parents, they live in Ponce, and my mother was in Puerto Rico at the time of Hurricane Maria with my grandmother, and it was not planned, and unfortunately, there was a situation in which the hurricane struck. It was too late for them to get back, and we couldn't contact them for a couple weeks. And it was very terrifying. I felt frustrated, and I felt scared, and I was very worried that my mother and grandmother may have lost their lives during this Category 5 climate-induced hurricane. Over 4,000 Puerto Ricans died as a result of Hurricane Maria. And observing the federal administration's response to it was twice as horrendous as the water bottle scheme. I bring you this context because I am neither here nor there. My mind is everywhere. I am here in Connecticut, but my mind is in Puerto Rico. And when I'm over there, my body is in Puerto Rico, but my mind is here. I am forever at conflict. That is what it means to be a Puerto Rican that really feels the way they do about the diaspora, and who feels the centuries worth of colonization in the island of Puerto Rico. I was fortunate to grow up in West Hartford, a beautiful town, but I had climate change knocking at my door. And so, as I told you earlier, I formed a group together, got more involved, worked at the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters for some years, led some campaigns related to voting rights and supporting climate action and supporting the advancement of electric school buses. And that work led me to Save the Sound. Environmental justice was a big part of that dialogue. I learned of at least a decade-long effort regarding the state's environmental justice law and the state's climate law. There are a couple statutes. One is the Global Warming Solutions Act. One is the state's environmental justice law. The Global Warming Solutions Act is a statute that requires Connecticut to reduce carbon emissions 45% by 2030, 80% by 2050. And we are not on track to reducing those emissions. We are not on track to meeting those targets. The Department of Energy and Environmental Protection is supposed to release a new greenhouse gas inventory report this week. And I want us to brace ourselves for some disappointing news, but I want us to be assured that we have what it takes to push public policy that will combat the climate crisis. I was very moved by Maya's words earlier regarding the effort for a green amendment, and the first of which being done in Pennsylvania. That it must have been tricky waters. The other statute I mentioned to you earlier was the Environmental Justice Statute, which in its original form required basic public participation requirements in decisions that impact environmentally distressed and economically distressed communities. The Department of Energy and Environmental Protection works with the Department of Economic and Community Development to identify what they consider the top 25 economically and environmentally most distressed communities. Many a time I've heard from New Haven residents, why isn't New Haven on that list? We have like 7, 8, 9 affecting facilities in our backyard, and the state is ignoring us. And I feel where everybody's coming from. And I think this environmental justice statute, strengthening it and strengthening the state's climate law are a couple tools to get in the right direction, put us on track to reducing our carbon emission standards and saying no to pollution in environmental justice communities and environmental justice census blocks, in which New Haven does have a large environmental justice census block. But I bring this to you all today, and I have fact sheets out in the lounge, front and back, on SB 1145 and SB 1147. SB 1145, we're seeking some improvements to update emissions targets, establish accountability, enhance enforceability of the climate law, and expand authority to adopt policies and regulations. With the environmental justice law, we're looking for DEEP to deny affecting facility-related permits based on cumulative impact. The state has not had the authority to deny permits for affecting facilities, and this could change that. I grew up 2 miles from the Capital Area Systems gas plant in Hartford, in West Hartford, and just on the border. And I think that had an impact on my health growing up, and I think the lack of fuel-efficient vehicles in the 90s also had an impact on my health. I have nephews, I have a nephew, and I have nieces, and these bills are very important to me because they rely on the bus to go to school, and they are also exposed to some affecting facilities in the area. And so, please, all of the effort that has gone into the Green Amendment this session, I encourage you to share that with SB 1145 and SB 1147. We've started a Connecticut Coalition for Climate Action, and you can read more about it on the sheets in the lobby. Hope is not lost; it is here. Keep us in your hearts, and you will be in mine.
Boy, I'm not good at podiums. I'm used to walking around, using my hands. My name is Aziz Daykhan. I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Roundtable on Climate and Jobs. The work that we do is to bring different coalitions into what we call a just transition. We work with the trades, we work with social and environmental organizations and interfaith organizations to make sure that a just transition from fossil fuels to renewables is workable. And as you can see through the federal government, through the Biden administration, they're following that path as well. The IRA bill, the crazily named Inflation Reduction Act, embodies that whole idea that if we move forward, and as we move forward, not if, as we move forward, that we move forward using trades, using leveling a playing field so that there are prevailing wage jobs, that there are sustainable jobs, that there's a path from fossil fuels to renewables, that there's a way to make sure that people have work to do. And our trade partners are concerned about it. And we passed a few years ago a bill that has a long name, but it's basically a climate jobs initiative. And that bill puts labor standards on large renewable projects, 2 megawatts or larger. It's a landmark bill that we've tried to pass for many years in this state. And before that, the roundtable helped pass offshore wind proposals that you see now being developed in Bridgeport and New London. And these bills are really important, and currently, well, I'll get to what we're doing currently. These bills are important because they create a foundation for jobs, but it's not enough just to create jobs. In Connecticut, what we see is a transportation issue as well, and Alex brought up the whole point of electric vehicles. Electric vehicles are great, but just last month, we stopped fare-free transit. And we did that, the state did that during COVID, and took it back. And that costs people a lot of money, and we didn't have to do it. This state has enough money to be able to do stuff like this, and they don't do it. And you look throughout the country, and you look at Idaho that's going to spend $18 million to pull people off SNAP programs. What is wrong with what we're doing is, we don't care about the poor, we don't care about marginalized people, we just don't care enough. So your proposal, the Green Amendment, is really important to put a constitutional backbone to the work that we're doing. And what we need to continue to do in transportation is to make sure that we can create workforce development, we can bring in so many apprentices into jobs, into sustainable jobs. But if we can't get them to the job site, what are we really doing here? So we need to create a better transportation system. We need to create a better way for people to get to work, and there are solutions. This isn't a new problem. This is a problem that's been out here for 20 years or more. It takes the will of the people to make this stuff happen. And so now we're working on a bill, SB 961, which also has a crazy long name, but it's basically a carbon-free healthy school bill. And we started the program in Bridgeport because Bridgeport's one of the more needy cities in the state. It's a poor city. And if you look at Bridgeport, in the most marginalized communities, they have the worst environmental pieces there. There's gas plants, there's incinerators. It doesn't make any sense, but it's there because they're marginalized and the people in those communities' voices are never heard. And we need to make sure that those voices are lifted up, and it's our responsibility to do that. And we can't just parachute ourselves into those communities. We need to talk to people. We're community organizers. We're not just organizers. We're community. I got started in this like 53 years ago when on the first Earth Day, I went to a boarding school and hitchhiked my way to Princeton, New Jersey, and celebrated the Earth. And 53 years later, the Earth is in crisis. And again, you go to Bridgeport and you go to the schools. The first day we were in Bridgeport, we met with the building superintendent of the schools. And we were waiting. It was a rainy, cold, rainy day. And we were sitting in the outer office of the, I guess he was the school superintendent. And the school superintendent was having a meeting of principals. And when the principals started coming out, they went to the building superintendent who we were sitting next to, and one of them said, "George, I need more garbage cans." I'm thinking, you need more garbage cans? What does that mean? She didn't respond to me because I was thinking that in a thought bubble. What she was saying was that the building was leaking so much that she couldn't catch any more water. Is that a way to go to school? I went to public school in New York City. That's not the way to go to school. So we recognize that there are trouble in these schools. We recognize that the environmental conditions in these schools make it difficult to retain teachers. It makes it difficult to study. One of the things of this bill that people want us to, we've been taking stuff out of the bill because they're mandates and nobody likes mandates, and I like mandates because if you don't have mandates, nobody listens to you. Fine, I get it. Lyndon Johnson once signed a bill, and the Republicans on one side, Democrats on the other, and he said, this must be a good bill because nobody likes it. So there's compromise that has to happen. I get it. But the one thing I really don't want to compromise, I don't want to compromise taking temperature controls out of schools. And why? Because in pet stores you have those controls, but you don't have them in schools, and they want me to take that out. And you know what? In the scheme of things, if we need to do that to pass this bill, which will help build schools, which will target energy efficiencies in schools, then maybe I'm Lyndon Johnson, but I'm not. And so my first Earth Day, 53 years ago, and what was a celebration of the earth, and now I'm crying on the earth. This is a crisis, and it irritates me when people call it a climate change. No, folks, it's a crisis. It's a crisis, and we're in trouble. And if we don't do something, with people like are on this panel, and people like you in front and Maya, where are we? What do we do? We're community organizers. We're a community. Let's rise up and make sure that the community listens to everybody. Let's be inclusive. The roundtable makes sure that we look at everything through the lens of racial equality, racial equity, that the structural COVID showed us the fractures of this country. It showed us how the racial disproportionate pieces of where we are. You know, I grew up in New York City, and the Bruckner Boulevard, the Bruckner Highway separated communities, and not just separated them, but created asthma zones. So what are we doing here? And what are you doing here? And what are you doing? What we're doing is trying to fight this thing. And we need to rise up, make our voices heard on a daily basis to make sure that electeds, Representative Michelle is one of them, will listen to us. And he's one of the ones that does listen to us, but a real one. But there are more behind him who don't listen, who have their own power bases that they want to control, these little pieces that they have to keep. And so a constitutional amendment will give us those rights. And a constitutional amendment will make us stronger. You know, somebody asked me just recently, where do you start? How do you start? And my experience has always been you start at the bottom. You know, grassroots have sprouts. So join your town environmental committee and work your way up. And then go to Michelle's office and bang on his door. Representative Michelle, help me. And I'm sorry we're picking on you, but we're picking on you because we love you. We did, right?
Legislators are nowhere without the advocates.
Yeah. So that's my message. I think that, you know, none of the work that we do is easy. The roundtable recognizes that we don't always agree with everybody, right? There are people who don't believe in project labor agreements. There are people who don't understand that it's important, you know, that the jobs that we would lose at the gas plant are really important to the trades. But we need to show them a path where we can find them jobs. We need to show them a path that there are offshore wind projects that create jobs. But if we don't hold developers to the fire of the feet and the anger of the people, we're lost. And so we passed this bill a couple of years ago that puts, you know, wage conditions on large projects. But then we see developers coming in. It's a 2 megawatt threshold. We see developers coming in doing 2 projects at 1 megawatt. Really? Really? So we need to make our voices heard. We need to make sure that while we may not agree on everything, the one thing that we do agree on is we're in trouble. So I'm just going to end it by this. There's a theory, and I can never remember the woman's name, about pleasure activism. And the theory about pleasure activism is, if you don't do this and enjoy yourselves, and I'm angry a lot, I'm always angry, but I like to have fun with my anger, if you understand what I mean. So I suggest to everybody in this room, whatever anger you have, whatever energy you have, make sure that it's pleasurable. Make sure that the work that you do incorporates music, incorporates other people's cultures. You know, the words that you talk about Puerto Rico are just like that. Those are, my people are from Iran, and I embrace my culture. I don't run from it because people call me an eco-jihadist or worse. So embrace the world that you've come from. Share it with other people. Enjoy the work that you do. Take pleasure from the work that we're doing. Yeah, it's a crisis, but you know what? There have been other crises that are just, well, not as bad, but looked bad at the time. I mean, when you look at World War I, that was horrific, but we came through that. And we're going to come through this, but we can't come through this without community. So enjoy yourselves, pass amendments, pass bills, pass my bill. But more than anything, take a look at your neighbors and the people that aren't your neighbors and recognize that we're all one part of one big piece. And not to get crazy religious, because I'm not, and I apologize for being in a church and not being religious. Nevertheless, we can come together under different banners and make sure that the work that we do together actually has some meaning to it. Thank you.
Everybody, yeah, thank you, Maya. That was excellent and reverend. And I also just want to say, thank you to Kim Stoner and Amy Harris. You guys have been awesome in terms of the work you've done on that, and I know we've all been very, very impressed. So I guess before I start, I just want to say with what Aziz was saying, that is a key point. So I'm in Killingly, we had this big 650 megawatt power plant proposed, and I'll get to that, but when we had our hearing before the Connecticut Siting Council, locally, the opposition was almost universal against this facility, but it was also filled with folks from the Boilermakers Union and several unions who were advocating for this plant. And it's my cousin works in the local tech school and probably the best masonry program in the country and sends kids into the building trades union. And I know how important those jobs are to those kids and how they really offer a lot of kids who might not be going to college, real middle class kind of life. But it's obviously very conflicted because this was the second power plant in our town. We already have an 840 megawatt power plant, which is more or less tied with Oxford as the biggest in the state. And but I think that this is a key issue, is that what happens with the members of the Boilermakers Union when these things aren't happening, and are our green jobs stepping up as much as they should be? And I think that really needs to be a critical focus, so that as we move towards a greener economy, we can honestly say that where all these folks have better opportunities, or at least equal opportunities going forward. So I appreciate that. You just say your name. Yeah, I'll get to, sorry. Ian McDonald from Killingly, Connecticut. And I'm here from No More Dirty Power in Killingly, and the other things that Kim listed, I said she could shorten it, but she kept it like that. But and really, I worked hard on this, but as everybody who knows what happened, there was a lot of us who worked really hard, and to whatever extent we've had some success, any number of those people could be speaking here, and I think that's what it takes. But so we fought for, since 2016, this second 650 megawatt power plant was proposed in our town, roughly a mile away from the 840 megawatt facility, and in the same area of town where 3 of our schools are that my kids and all the local kids go to. And we really did not have, maybe spare you a lot of the saga that went into that. We were told, oh, this is this great thing, aren't you lucky? Aren't you lucky to have, this another power plant in town? The town manager was kind of telling us, and the company was telling us, whether the air is going to be cleaner with the second power plant. And, of course, that's not true. And despite what people say about natural gas, there's significant, NOx and ozone and dangerous pollutants. Never mind, the methane emission chain from the point of fracking to pollution is really disastrous for the climate. And if this plant had been built, it very well could have made a lot of the governor's goals untenable. So hopefully, we hope it had stopped in 2022. They failed to, they have to get this capacity supply obligation, which is a portion of funding for these things to get built. It didn't get it because they didn't meet certain financial benchmarks. And anyways, we hope it's done, although we've heard a few maybe somewhat disturbing things. But I guess what I'll talk about is why I think what we're doing here is important. As was mentioned about New Haven, despite what many people in New Haven communities they've grown up with and pollution they've dealt with, they're looking at, they might not be on this list of distressed municipalities, although there are census blocks that may have some protection. And Alex and Gabriella have been doing awesome work on this 1147, which will create some protections for cumulative emissions for environmental justice communities. But there's probably a little concern about some members of, now East Haven still has some protection potentially if this bill passes, and also it really makes so deep could consider it. We were trying to get it so deep had to consider it, and there would be real cutoffs, and we don't know that I don't know. It doesn't look like that's going to happen despite Representative Michelle's best efforts, but we'll see. But what this does is for those, maybe for communities like New Haven, and Killingly has been on this distressed municipalities list, and very similar to New Haven for 60 in the last 20 years, and has dealt with a lot of more rural kind of poverty, high asthma rates. But we've recently fallen off. I think it might have been the Frito-Lay expansion and changed that. So, but for a town that has large amounts of pollution and may or may not get the protections that the environmental justice bill could provide, something like this could be very helpful, because there are towns in Connecticut. Oxford is another example with a very large power plant where there is a real concentration of dangerous levels of pollution, and this could go a ways towards protecting them. And I really liked what you said about just how the difference between having an actual right to protection versus, all the way that these things get negotiated away. And I remember we also have right on the border of us in another EJ community, Putnam, Connecticut, there's an 80-acre incinerator ash landfill that's been approved, and kind of went through that process as well. And in reading Deep's ruling, they stated well, now this river is the Quinnebog River. It's the biggest kind of upstream on the biggest river system in eastern Connecticut. And in Killingly and in Putnam, we've finally been reclaiming this. There was industrial facilities previously, and it's like, okay, we're taking our river back. People are using it for recreation. People fish in there, even if they shouldn't, but they do. And we think, okay, we're moving in the right direction. And reading the ruling from Deep, they're saying, well, if we don't need to worry too much about if there's a breach in this ash facility. And we know what's in this toxic ash. It's dioxins. It's all kinds of horrible things. And if there's a breach and this goes into the river, well, the river quality is already substandard, so this won't change the river quality. Now, of course, if you have a massive leak, breach and leak, it will change the river quality. but that's one technicality we're talking about, because technically, I guess it won't change that standard, so it's okay. We can have this here. We don't have to worry too much. And, so I really appreciate what you're doing and what Kim's been doing, and all the advocates here are awesome. And people around the state, I know Melinda's here from C3M. They were such a help in the fight against Killingly. And just don't be afraid to get involved and speak your mind and bring whatever you can to the movement, because everybody has a different skill set. And I'll say, in fighting this stuff for a while, there's always an opportunity for folks to use whatever they're good at. It's needed. So appreciate all of you, and thank you.
I'm a little too short to climb around those guys. So look at this. You had to bend over. I have to fix this. How are you guys? Good evening. Thank you for being here with us tonight. My name's Gabriela. I was born in Peru, and I was giggling as everybody was talking about the names that they were called. The first name I was called as an environmentalist was Green Blood. It was Green Blood. I got into fisticuffs with the little boy next door because he was trying to step on the monarch, little caterpillars that were crossing the sidewalk. And I was like, no, I pushed him out of the sidewalk. Like, you can't do that. And that was the first name. Most recently, I'm Agatha the Witch, by those who support Tweed Airport. And I had to look her up. I had no idea who she was. She can apparently bend trees and make the wind go and kill all her opponents. And so when I looked it up, instead of getting offended, I said, wow, thank you so much. I wish I could do that. We would be done with this. Thank you for thinking so highly of me. To me that speaks of having fun, right? Like, because they're trying to demoralize us, right? These folks are, let me back up for a second. So let me say thank you so much. I almost, while you were speaking, Maya, I felt like, yeah, everything she just said is literally what's happening here. Literally everything. We are being called every name in the book. Sean Scanlon, when he was the director of the airport and while he was a state rep, literally rolled his eyes at multiple people. It's on video while we said that air pollution causes respiratory harm. He literally rolled his eyes at us and then lied to me. Because me being me, and you guys who've known me a long time, I said, I'm sorry, sir, you can't do that. That's disrespectful. And so we've been called, what have we been called, Ann? Hysterical women, right? We're hysterical, we're crazy, we're called nut jobs. I won't cuss in your church, but I was called a smug bee. And I made a whole post about that because I was like, yeah, I'm smug, I'm standing on truth. I am absolutely smug because I am standing on truth and you're not gonna shake me from that. We deal with PFAS, and I'm really sorry Rachel had to leave, but she actually was instrumental in making sure that they addressed some of that early on, and so she was a big part of this. There's Leanne, there's people in East Haven, so Leanne's been living right underneath the flight path, and she actually had her stuff tested. They found petroleum chemicals on her lawn chairs. And she's about a mile away, right, from the airport. You're not even right there. So a lot of times people think that it's NIMBYism, and Brantford actually is also very much impacted. And they have environmental justice zones as well. They have environmental justice census tracts, believe it or not. I know that's hard to believe, right? You're like, well, Brantford's a nice town. Well, no, like we have it everywhere. And so my stepdaughters live in Ohio, in the Rust Belt, and to hear like the stories of what's happening in our town, so many times we talk about what's happening in Alaska, we talk about what's happening in Ohio, we talk about what's happening in Florida, but right here at home, we have a power plant in my neighborhood that was the first reservation, right? It's not an EJ zone because there's a few wealthy people that live on the water. The rest of us are single parents, working class people, people who have inherited their homes from their grandparents, right? And 40% of the children at Nathan Hale are Latino. There's a bunch of Latino children also in East Haven. We're an increasingly immigrant community. We have a power plant we counted, Alex, what was it, 6 or 7 different oil farms? Have you ever gone onto Tomlin Bridge? I got a speeding ticket the other day because I was trying to get past it because I was so sick to my stomach. I'll start a GoFundMe for that later. But yeah, so I mean, it's really terrible. And so when the wind blows a certain way, we really do get sick. And now with this airport, the mayor who went to the environmental school here at Yale, he told us tough luck. He got red in the face. He got red in the face when we held his feet to the fire, and he told us tough luck. They don't care that the fumes that they're spraying right into our homes, and even Rep. Al Paolillo said he can smell them when he's standing outside of Nathan Hale, right outside our school. He could smell those fumes. Those are known carcinogens, known endocrine disruptors. They are knowingly poisoning people, and it goes for 12.5 miles. We can smell them, sure, but 12.5 miles, it impacts preterm birth. So we live in a state where people have a right to choose whether they want to keep their pregnancy or not. But now, what's happening to the people that are choosing to keep their pregnancy, their children are being irreparably harmed because it's more convenient for somebody to just, or they think it's more convenient, to take those extra, less 15 minutes, or so they think. But what Tweed has ignored out of their greed, because don't forget, it's Goldman Sachs. Do you guys know the Goldman Sachs operating model? It's really fun. They're the new robber barons. So what they do is they get grant money, they get federal tax dollars, they say they're doing private investment, they laugh all the way to the bank, because when it all goes, south, it goes kaput, they get to claim it as a tax write-off. So what happens? We get stuck with the cleanup, and we get stuck with the bill. They paid their investors, they made their 10, 20% return, we're screwed, right? We're poisoned, so we're paying up front with the poisons, we're paying up front with the tax dollars, and then we're paying in the back end with the cleanup. That's their model. They're the ones that crashed the housing, right? Back in the early 2000s. It was Goldman Sachs that started that train. And here they are in New Haven, Connecticut, doing the same thing with the environment. So they're putting PFAS in the water, knowingly, right into the streams where people go fish. They're literally pumping carcinogens into our children. We have to run inside of our homes. Can't walk the dog. And now a street that's from 1630s, you can't go on it. I almost got run over twice the other night walking my kid's dog, right? Twice in one night. We moved there because my son has arthritis and he couldn't go up and downstairs. We used to live in Fairhaven. I know Rev Kev from way back in the day, right? And I loved my little green. We still talk about the greenhouse and the pancake place across the street. Anakin, who's sitting outside, is very sad he didn't get to live in the greenhouse. But truly, he's like, how come I didn't get? It's a true story. But we moved to a street that was safe for my kid that has an injury. Do you know how many times I get told, well, you knew what you were doing when you moved there? I didn't have a choice. And I'm a single mom now. I still don't have a choice, right? And so when we moved there, just like when Reb Kev moved to where he was, there was a law in place that said they couldn't expand. And that law was put into place because there was actually research from the FAA and everybody else that said, oh, wow, this is not safe. Why isn't it safe? Do you guys know what it looks like over there? So my favorite is, Sean Scanlon called it a water bowl. It's a water basin. It's literally a bowl, and it's all wetlands. They're trying to tell you it's not wetlands, but it's all wetlands. And the ocean is right there, and we're in a peninsula. So what happens? Have you guys lived over by the water ever? What happens? The fog rolls in, right? And after a while, it burns off. But because it's a bowl, it stays there. So this past weekend, for 3 days in a row, planes were doing this. They couldn't land. And they were spinning all around. They weren't just impacting New Haven and East Haven. They were spinning over Branford and Guilford. They spin up to Wallingford. They go over to Hamden. They have to turn around at West Haven. They're polluting the sound even more. They're going around and around and around, and it's terrifying. Because less than 10 years ago, two little girls, a teenager and her toddler sister, died in a fiery inferno because a plane crashed. Because you know how close the airport is? It's like this. There are people that literally can stand at their front door, and right there where, I forgot your name, we went for a walk together, or where Leanne is, that's the runway. Leanne, raise your hand. It's the honest to God truth. Anstress has seen it. People have seen it. It's literally, you're at somebody's front porch and there's the runway. There's the runway. And then our city officials are saying, oh, but it'll be better when we expand it. Oh, and they try to pit East Haven against New Haven. Our mayor and his staff have said to many of us, why do you care? It's going to move to East Haven. I'm sorry. Are the people of East Haven less valuable than the people of New Haven, or vice versa? The runway's not going to move. How can you tell me that 40 planes, right? Because they're saying, oh, it's only 22 departures. That's 44, my friends. When you go somewhere, you have to leave again. So that's 44 times that plane is flying over your heads with their carcinogens. And they're trying to say, oh, the bigger planes are they're better for the environment. What about all the idling cars that are coming in? What about everybody driving in from Madison? Right? It's all concentrated into this bowl. And just like the fog stays, guess what else stays? The steam from those jet engines. So the IPCC says that we should, under no circumstance, expand any aviation infrastructure. I shared that with the mayor. I gave him the report. He literally went like this. The dismissiveness that we're treated with is disgusting. Disgusting. Am I at time? No, okay, sorry. Just because you know. But the issues of Tweed are a microcosm. I'll leave it at this. The issues of Tweed are a microcosm of everything else, of the names that were called, of the dismissiveness, of greed over people. You know what they're making money on? Their parking lot. They got real mad at us, right? It just was there. They were so rude that the chair lady for the committee had to tell somebody to cut it out because they were so rude to us. They were just doing the personal attacks. Why? Because they make money on parking. They make money on parking. They want to do a 4,000 spot structure on the wetlands for parking. And that's not even going to cover it, because if it's 200 people per plane and it's going to come back and forth 44 times, right, because it's 22 planes, did the math, it's 8,800 people per day that will be coming through there. That doesn't include staff. That doesn't include ground crew, right? Where are those people going to park? Where happens to those cars? We know that people don't really commute, and that's on wetlands, and they're saying, oh, it was previously disturbed. It's okay. It's kind of like extra virgin oil versus virgin oil, right? It's still olive oil, it doesn't, right? It's still oil, it's still wetlands. And given that it's an area that already floods, given that the Water Pollution Authority is there, we really need the wetlands. We need the wetlands. We don't need to go to Florida. We might want to go to Florida. Shoot, I want to go to Egypt again. I don't need to go to Egypt, right? I would love to go to Peru. I don't need to go to Peru. That's a desire versus a need. What I need is to breathe. What I need is for my children not to be scared. My kids have woken up so many times in the middle of the night, and we have the fancy windows. They've woken up so many times, that they've started doing poorly in school. Their moods have changed. They're being negatively impacted because those planes are late and they can't land. They're injured. My children are being injured because it's more convenient, but it's not, because they're irresponsible and they're putting their customers at risk too. They knew they couldn't land there. There's tons of information, historical information, that says it's not safe to do this, that it's foolish, just foolish on every level. And now their customers are being injured. They're just leaving them in Delaware. Why Delaware? Why not Bradley? Why? Because they don't want to pay the fee. right? They don't care. They're leaving the de-icer out. That's flammable. It's right by the parking. It could go poof at any time. Somebody could throw a cigarette out their window, because I'm telling you what, they don't care, right? And poof, like everything blows up because it's all sitting there. Since 2003, Tweed has been known as a terrorist threat because it is not safe. Anybody can, there's a fence, and I'm short, that only goes to my hip, right? Anybody can go in, take a plane, and do whatever. It is not safe to have this airport where it is, under the circumstances that it is, for a multitude of reasons. But everything that we're talking about today is encapsulated in this little thing that's happening here. And it's not just us. That's the rub. In Stratford, they're looking to expand the airport there, Sikorsky. In Oxford, they're looking to expand Oxford. When does it end? So we all need to work together. And really, like, what I want to say more than anything else is that this is hard work. It is hard work. I mean, gosh, you know, it's like, you know, do you guys ever have, you know, some of you must have siblings or family and stuff, and things get icky, and, right, like, and you're in a stressful situation, and it's hard. It's hard, but we have to learn to laugh with each other, and we have to learn to say, all right, well, they were having a bad day, and I'll talk to them tomorrow, right? And like Leanne and I have, right, we have words, and sometimes, and other times we hug, and, you know, and then there's like artists like Muna, who I hope get more involved, right? And then I'm sorry I didn't bring my Dr. Seuss book today, because I read that to the legislators, which I think you were there for that, right, Representative Michelle? Yeah, I literally took out the Lorax. You know, but I think that we all really need to work together, and Tweed gives us an ability to address a lot of things that have been going on, and yeah, that's it. Thank you.